What's up, world? Welcome to Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I'm here again with my boy, my brother, Tommy Dixon. How are you this morning, bro?
Pretty good, man. How you doing?
Good to be here with you again. So
As
we here
always.
again, my bad. We here again doing our book club, going to engage in some literature for you. This time we've chosen to do The Pearl, John Steinbeck. Uh, so I'm going to do a quick little introduction on Steinbeck. Tommy's going to give a brief introduction on the Pearl, and then we're just going to talk about it a little bit. Um, and just getting straight into it, John Steinbeck, really maybe one of Americans' most notable authors, maybe one of America's favorite authors. He's taught in every high school across the nation, every public high school, I'm sure. Um, but at times he certainly was considered controversial, and some of his books were even banned from being taught in schools across the nation at times. Um, Steinbeck was born February 27th, 1902, in Salinas, California, which is really like a suburb of Monterey. And Monterey and that valley kind of going south really inspired the people in the landscape, really inspired Steinbeck and his work throughout his career. He grew up very solid middle class lifestyle. His father was a treasurer for the local municipal government. His mother was a school teacher who had a love of literature. I wonder where, maybe that was a family thing. Um, and probably had a pretty good lifestyle growing up, even to the point where they had, maids and servants around the house and things like that. It's funny we're all post COVID now. There's always that thing that there was before and there was after it, right? And he actually almost died at 16 due to a flu pandemic and some pneumonia that he contracted because of that. And this was kind of in a pre-antibiotic era. They didn't have the same medicines we do now. That kind of comes important later on in life. He did go to Stanford after his high school years and was there for 4 or 5 years, but did not receive a degree. Spent his time drinking and partying and carrying on like that. And then, like a lot of the authors we look at, he kind of did that. He went across the country, traveling around, working at different jobs, and actually was able to find some success writing. And that's where he really kind of maybe, what is it, when you get your chops or whatever in a career, got that as a journalist, kind of different places across the country. It wasn't until 1929 that he published his first novel, Cup of Gold, uh, with not really a huge success. He continued on writing. At this point, back in California, living with his first wife, Carol Henning, who we talked about more when we looked at Grapes of Wrath. Living with Carol Henning and really kind of living off of her. She was the primary breadwinner for the family. And in 1935, Steinbeck published Tortilla Flat, and that was his first major success. And it was based on the people he saw around Monterey post World War I America and kind of that lost generation, I guess, which is interesting. Steinbeck never really quite felt a part of that lost generation. Um, Maybe we might be able to talk about some other time. What he's probably most known for is what's called the Dust Bowl fictions, where he really there's three novels where he really takes a close look at the Great Depression and those folks that he ends up calling Okies, um, traveling from the Midwest to California during the Dust Bowl. Um, Two of his most known works, probably, of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath, are two of the three in that saga. Um, and The Grapes of Wrath even got him into the movie business. It's interesting though, East of Eden, he considered his magnum opus and his greatest work. It's funny that I've actually not read it. It's a larger work, and maybe that's why I haven't. Um, but that also was made into a movie with James Dean. Steinbeck died December 20th, 1968. He had been struggling with heart disease, probably brought on from incessant drinking throughout his life, and contracted the flu again in the 1968 flu pandemic, and kind of had a heart attack as a result of the symptoms from the flu. Um, Now, what we're here to talk about, The Pearl was published in 1945, and I really call it a short story, and it's based on an indigenous folktale. Um, Tommy, what do you think? Would you call this a short story or a novella? I'm not sure, and I don't know the technical terms on that, but I'm not sure it's quite long enough to be a novella. What do you think? And give us a little intro to The Pearl.
That's probably an appropriate description. Short story, maybe it's less than 100 pages, I think. Fairly small book as far as that goes. You can read it in one setting, two settings pretty easily, without spending a whole lot of time on it. Um, so The Pearl is a story about a man named Kino and his family. They live in a village off of the west coast of Mexico where the way they provide their living is by diving for pearls that provided great wealth for the kings of Spain throughout history. Um, they have a very meager existence. They're basically poor, but happy though. And the book kind of emphasizes how there's different types of wealth, and you learn that as you go through this story. Things are going well for them in the beginning until tragedy strikes whenever a scorpion stings their infant son, and that becomes a matter of life and death, basically. So, out of desperation, Kino takes his boat out and he's diving for pearls to try to come up with funds to pay the local physician who's got no interest in treating his son otherwise. Uh, During his diving that day, he comes across what's referred to as the pearl of the world. It's the biggest, prettiest, most perfect pearl anyone's ever seen. And word of this spreads through the village. Everyone realizes Kino has just become very wealthy, even though he's not sold the pearl up to this point. So as they're making their plans to sell the pearl and what they're going to do with the funds after taking care of their son's health and all that, you see how the mood towards him and his family changes throughout the town. They went from being well liked to kind of despised in a way. Everybody from the beggars to the gangsters, the street thugs, basically, all the way up to the physicians and even the local priest is trying to scheme on Kino and his family to figure, how can we get a piece of this money? How can we get a piece of the pearl, basically? Um, People try to hustle him as far as the value of the pearl, and eventually there's some violent conflicts where people are coming to take it from him and he has to defend himself, and that leads to a situation where he has an altercation with some men and him and his family wind up having to flee the town, and they're pursued by some professional trackers who are sent to take the pearl from them, basically, and possibly bring Kino to justice, but it seems like they'd be happy dead or alive as far as his part's concerned. Uh, they go on this journey. He does what he has to do to try to take care of his family, and in the end, things don't necessarily work out the way that he would have liked, but lessons are learned for him and for the readers as far as that goes. There's a lot of value in the struggle that they go through related to the pearl and the problems that his sudden wealth has brought on.
Yeah, and it's really amazing to me all that Steinbeck puts, and the edition that we read was 90 pages,
Yeah, I think
right?
that's right.
And just credit Steinbeck And I think it's well, I think it's safe to say that you and I share in an appreciation for John Steinbeck. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. He's become one of my favorites as far as authors we've explored their works throughout this past year. Um, his artistry, not just with the writing itself, but the descriptive writing. He sets the scene. You can really visualize it through his description. I mean, it's almost like he paints the picture with his words. It's really impressive, and not just in the Pearl, but in Grapes of Wrath and of Mice and Men as well. He does a really great job, and that's in comparison to some other authors who do great works, but they just have different styles as far as that goes.
Yeah, and I think you really said it best right then when you said paint the picture, because that is exactly what Steinbeck does for me when it comes to those landscapes and the
Mhm.
people. Just like what I said earlier with kind of those inspirations that he got from that. Yeah, I'm with that 100%. It's funny to me, or not funny, but I think it's important that first little bit, that little couple of sentences, that's an introduction on the page before. So I guess maybe 91 pages that says, um, this is a parable, right? And we
Mhm.
kind of talked about that and kind of the significance of that and kind of what that meant. And so to me, and I think for maybe most Americans at the time, that's a little bit of a biblical reference, even if you're not necessarily a Christian. The use of parables to teach kind of complex ideas in a very simple and concise way that anybody can relate to. Um, do you think it fulfills that description as a parable? Do you think that's what it kind of was?
I think so. You could look at this story and even the Pearl itself, and you could kind of replace those with modern themes like we had discussed in our study. In today's society, the Pearl could be a winning lottery ticket. You know,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
imagine if you went from having not a lot as far as material wealth to having a lottery ticket worth millions of dollars, and the struggles you might go through if you made that knowledge public before you're able to cash it in, or even after you cash it in, and the people that come out of the woodwork that want a piece of the action, so to speak.
yeah. And it's cool. You refer like the previous discussion that we had on this. You said, the main thing is for the love of money is the root of all evil, right? And man, that's such a simple thing to say, but to kind of live it in this way, right? It makes it a whole lot more real, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
So Steinbeck, man, he's a deep dude, and you and I in the past have kind of looking at Steinbeck as a whole. We've kind of developed some themes that he deals with in a lot of his writings, and I think it's been well noted. This isn't necessarily new stuff, but he really deals with the idea of classism, right? Steinbeck kind of was the champion or a great advocate for the working class or the outcast or the left out of modern society, and really dealing with that post industrial revolution age, right? Um, he does that same thing in this, but almost in a different way. Would you say?
Yeah, I agree with that. The classism is a theme throughout the book. There's different sects of the society where people fall into certain roles and they're respected and even revered based on where they fall in that socioeconomic status.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So, and obviously, we don't have time to go back into our previous discussion on previous books, but just from what we know and what we talked about with the Grapes of Wrath and how he almost didn't deal with racism, right?
Right.
Except for in that title, that was kind of a interesting to us. Um, is he making the same comment to America by using the Mexican indigenous and the Spanish colonizer to say, "Hey, America, look at this in this way," but it's
Yeah, I think
really kind of maybe referring to slavery and the Black American in the United States.
yeah, I think this work is should be very relatable, regardless of the culture that he's written it about or that the story's based on. It crosses over pretty well internationally, I'd say. I'd say it's a theme that has occurred and reoccurred in many countries around the world throughout history, as far as that goes.
Yeah, yeah. I just found it interesting that in looking at how we've looked at those two works, it's almost that he doesn't mention American racism, but it's like the racism there, and this is really for an American audience, you know.
Right.
And even the commentary on the American indigenous people, right? That we could spend forever just talking about that. Um, Another thing I find it interesting with Steinbeck, and I want to know what you think about this, is him telling the story, but he really tells it through almost four aspects of the story, where we look at the individual Kino, right, and the story we can say is about Kino, but we can just as much say that the story is about the family, right, and Kino's family and Juana and Koyoito.
Yeah.
Is that good enough?
Yeah.
Little gravy on
Boyatino,
there.
something like that. Yeah.
Little gravy on there.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah. But we could say it's about that family, right?
Right.
And then we can also say it's about his people, those
Yeah.
indigenous people and how their lifestyle was changing due to this modern Western influence almost.
And he
Um,
has a really cool way of highlighting that in this story too, with the music that he refers to. And
yes.
it's not music that's actually playing, but it's something he hears internally based on what's going on around him. The different vibes that he catches when people are trying to take advantage of him or trying to hurt his family. And also whenever things are going good and they're living their simple day-to-day life. It's a different music that he hears from his soul, so to speak.
Yeah, and I felt like that really was speaking back to that indigenous culture, like you said. You know what I
Right.
mean? And almost those other cultures coming in and different. There were different aspects of all of that, right? And
Hmm.
I really thought that was a cool, like a human. That's a humane way. That's something. That's a human way to describe that feeling, right? So we got the individual, we got the family, and we got his people as an ethnic group, but it also kind of tells the story of the human species as well, would you say?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. And we've kind of seen that before, right? You
Hmm.
think? Yeah. All right. Well, so the other thing that I think is important to talk about with Steinbeck, and then we'll kind of maybe wrap it up with a review, is the way he deals with maybe those archetypes, those stereotypical archetypes, particularly with women. And we can look at how he views women in this particular work, mostly in Juana, right? And a bit in the tertiary, I guess the sister-in-law is also there's a sister-in-law. Um, but how Steinbeck deals with feminine archetypes and the role of women in this work can be looked at just in the work, but it's also interesting to kind of look at how he does it across his works because it can be one way or the other sometimes, right?
Yeah. It tends to put some emphasis on the strong female characters and the different titles that we've read as far as that goes, and brings an appreciation to their role in the family, and even how their role changes depending on the circumstances, what they're going through at the time. Um, he's a masterful writer as far as that goes.
All right, all right. Well, so give us kind of closing up, I guess. Give us maybe a wrap up review recommendation, main point.
Yeah, man, I think a few takeaways that I found really inspiring, if you want to say that. The idea that education is freedom, and we've discussed several times between us. There's many different types of education, um, and that the desire for wealth, and especially when it's not necessarily earned, is the root of all evil. I mean, it's explores just how dark and greedy that the human spirit can become. Um, and the last thing I guess for me was that even though it starts out emphasizing how they come from a small village and it's kind of a meager existence, and you kind of view them as poor, it highlights throughout the story that there's also many different types of wealth. It's not just material things. There's other things that make you wealthy, and people are probably better off whenever they appreciate what they've got.
Yeah, that's deep stuff, regardless, and great insight. Um, so obviously you recommend the Pearl to a reader.
Oh yeah, definitely recommend it. And like I say, it's not a big book. I mean, this is the copy that I have right here, and I know we read the same edition. It would not take a lot of time, and it definitely is beneficial, I think, to anybody just to give it a look.
Yeah, I would echo that and say that anybody can really read this, even down to maybe middle school, and benefit from it. Maybe not understand some of the deeper themes and different deeper concepts that are going on, but because of that writing and that descriptive language and his masterful work, like you said, it's a good read for any age, and you're going to benefit from it to me anytime you read it. This is a short story. That same edition has sat around my mother's house and been picked up by many people on holidays and reunions and different things like that. And it's just a good little read all the way around. And it's a good introduction to John Steinbeck if you've never looked at him, I'd say too. Yeah.
I think if a person was going to take my advice on this, get a copy of this, give it a read, let your kids read it, and maybe everybody read it 10 years down the road again. And then another 10 years down the road, read it again, because it might strike you differently. You might feel differently, every time that you read it, based on your own growth and maturity and things like that, how a person changes as an individual, and the story can mean something different to you every time.
Man, that's beautiful. There ain't no way to top that. So let's talk about what we're going to get into next. We've decided to look at Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. I think that's going to be fun. I haven't read as much Huxley. I have read Brave New World before. So I think that's going to be fun to get into. Tommy, I want to tell you thank you again for doing this with me, brother. I really value this, and I really appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure, bro.
All right, this has been Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.